So guys, we are diving into Dooms of Dimension as this is going to be released on the day of release. So I do hope you guys are enjoying it. But today is talking about Dooms of Dimension. Is it a good or bad set? Now I know a lot of people have been probably talking about this set not in the most positive light or the most negative light, but we are going to jump into it as we cover it today. But before I get over that, remember our shameless plugs to like, comment, and subscribe. And remember to join the ad army. It does help out as we are on the storm to 1,000 subs, and it would help if you guys join up because there is a lot of people who have been coming in recently as shorts have been helping us grow the community out. So always remember to jump on. But we're going to start off as we dig into the first archetype here as we talk about DDD, as I think this being obviously on the cover in the form of the King Art Crisis, but also with the other DDD cards being released. I think a cool concept to talk about is how good is this archetype. Now, I think that's one of the problems of this set, as I cover this archetype first quickly, is that although this archetype is getting a lot of support because it obviously is a cover card, but more importantly, its support is designed to try to help modernize this strategy, as I do think DDD is a deck that definitely needed some modernization. I think that this is kind of the problem with this set, where it's good or bad. I think the wave of support is actually good for DDD, but I do think it is bad in the sense that DDD will see some meta play. I think it's a lot better than people are giving it credit for, but I do believe that this deck just still isn't where it needs to be. This is mostly because the Justice Hunters decks are a lot more automized, and a lot of the other decks in the format that are returning into this format are just a little bit more automized, and what I mean is they're just a lot simpler to play. DDD is not a very simple strategy. I think this is one of the more heavier combo decks. Now, it's not just because it has pendulum cards, by the way, everybody, because some people will say, oh, there's pendulums, too much text, too much stuff. No, DDD was already a complicated deck when it came out. Even with its introduction of pendulum monsters, this was a deck that was never very simple to play. So I do believe that with the introduction of its support here, this deck is a lot more complicated with a skill curve than most people would believe. There are obviously the one card combos, but they're not like other decks. Like, you'll understand if you look into this deck, because I would do maybe some videos for this as well, but like I said, the combos are not simple. Like, they take a lot more brain power, and that's not really knocking anyone. It's a very long combo string with a lot of bit more like technicalities in it that you need to know with this strategy. It rewards a good pilot, so I will say that this is a deck that definitely rewards its pilots. But if you are going to pick this up as a deck you want to play out of here, do know what you're getting yourself into. Check into other content creators on YouTube, other people anywhere. Look at combos, really understand this strategy before you play it, because it does reward people who understand it better, and it can really punish people who don't understand how to play it at all. Now, our next archetype to talk about is RB. Now, RB is an interesting strategy. I did make a short on this, but the reason why I wanted to talk about RB here is that I do like that its new support does give the deck a bit more range. I think that RB is definitely a lot better thanks to its new support, and this is mostly because the deck has a little bit more, I would say, power thanks to its support focusing on boosting its tools, like literally, not just the joke of them being like tools to equip to the different RB monsters. A lot of the cards here are designed to give the RB deck a little bit more like range, but also give it the ability to have flexibility with what it does. So like the fact that you can now take monsters, the fact that you can look at your opponent's hand, although they get to summon a monster from their hand, this deck now has hand information, which helps like decks like this that are a bit more rogue a chance to kind of step out and really play against the meta. Additionally, the fact that they have another Link monster the Shepherd's Crook is interesting because it is a Link 3, but the point is it's still a very decent monster, being like an opposite to Brute Blues, which is pretty cool. But I do think Next Phase is the one card that I'm really happy about, because although it's worded really weirdly because it has like a lot of this, then this kind of way, I like the fact that there's a way to reliably get life points in this deck, because one of its weaknesses that I could see when people try to play this pure is that it really does falter if the opponent was able to like knock away a lot of the monsters because of how the mechanic of this deck works. If you're unable to really like stop your opponent and they could literally just start running over some of your smaller bodies, it made your links and the rest of your deck a lot more vulnerable. So Next Phase gives this deck just a little bit more of something it didn't have. Like, it gives it like a very good disruption in the form of stopping people, because it is a counter trap too, so that's really cool. But also it allows this deck to kind of accelerate in spaces where now it has a going first option. The new monsters are definitely more for going first, in my opinion, especially the board wipe. But the key factor here of this deck, though, is why I kind of imbalance here, is that of the problem with the strategy is just that the RB strategy is just not really, I would say, like automized. It really still needs to be played with other decks to really get full power out of it. I think decks like the Rescue Ace version was something I saw that was really cool. Cyber Dragon versions of this deck has also been seen. I'm not trying to hate this deck because I actually don't dislike it at all. I think it's pretty cool, but I do see its weakness in terms of not being the most flexible strategy because of it having to run certain requirements because of the 1500 attack or lower effect of that the monsters have to follow. But like I said, of this archetype, it's a good archetype. It's not great, but I do think that if someone can crack the code, this is definitely an archetype that could see a lot of potential. Now, one deck I want to talk about that's an underdog is going to be Tri-Brigade. Now, Tri-Brigade, I do have a video up, early access for the new cards in here, so I won't talk about it too long. On Rumble, go check it out. Point is, this archetype specifically only received 2 cards. However, indirectly, they received a massive push from the ban list with Dryden's return. So like Tri-Zoo was something in the past, but because of Dryden's ban, it made the deck a lot weaker. And with Dryden returning, there's a possibility that this might be a little bit more viable. But the key elements here is that Mouser and Hammer are extremely powerful cards. They're really powerful for the Tri-Brigade deck itself, but for the Beast Warrior, and Wing Beast line, or the Tri-Beast, the main thing is that this engine now props up a lot of strategies that maybe weren't able to fully like access their levels before in terms of like scaling, because of the new ability of the Tri-Brigade archetype with these cards to kind of increase their power level ceiling. I think it's a really interesting concept. I go into depth about this more, but basically Mouser is just an extremely good card because it bridges the gap of being able to get more cards in graveyard, so it sets a pure Tri-Brigade a little bit better now, so they can finally have access to something like Bucephalus II. But Hammer is extremely good because it also facilitates the ability to get Bucephalus II out easier, but Hammer does work as a pseudo Revolt, so now you don't have to specifically just rely on Revolt or the main deck monsters. This is another option to do against your opponent, like in turn 2, or like on turn 3 if you're going into an opponent's board, or turn 1 where maybe your opponent's trying to disrupt you. You can fire off Hammer, as Hammer now allows you to play through Nibiru a bit more comfortably. So I do think that with all that considered, Tri-Brigade is one of these little archetypes that did get support in Doom's Dimension, although I wish there was a little bit more support because they would actually help out the set. I think what we got isn't too bad, and I still think these are 2 very good cards, but like I said, in Doom's Dimension, I think the power ceiling isn't really hitting the bar, so like these decks don't really push up against like the upper echelon decks, but someone definitely could sneak through because Rogue is definitely something that will be seen a lot during this format, so I would say don't knock this deck off the list. Don't ignore it because it can catch you sleeping if you're not ready. Now the next one is actually one of my favorite decks of all time, and this is the Goki archetype. I really love Goki. It's one of my favorite, if not my favorite, Link deck of all time. I just love what it does. I'm a big wrestling fan from when I was younger, and I just love the fact that the deck was always super straightforward. I think of the Link decks, in my opinion, it was the best Link deck to start with because every monster combo wise was really simple. You just you summon them. If you get the multiple on field, you then link them off, and then they search for more cards, and literally you just build up your giant Link monsters that way. So there was nothing really too crazy to not understand. With this new wave of support, I will say that the Goki archetype has really been reimagined. Now the reason for this is that they decided that the right call was to use the Goki's fighting spirit to tie together the archetypes that go Oniska, or I'm not calling him by his dub name. I don't know why some dub names are just stupid. But the point is, Go's deck was always kind of designed around just being Goki until they made him become a villain, and then he switched to Dino Wrestlers, and then for some reason the G Golems are now technically a part of his deck composition, even though he only played Crystal Heart, I think, in the anime. Like I said, I'm only saying that as a confused thing because that's kind of the problem with this archetype. I do think that the support is actually pretty stellar. I think Sheik Ogre is a really cool link too. I think the problem is I look at the other cards, and the issue is more of they're designed with going second in mind, I think. So I look at like Tyrant Ogre clearly being a combination of King T Wrestle, and I believe it's supposed to be Goki the Great Ogre. The point is, these cards are great. I think Mashin Ogre or Mashin Suprex, which I think is being changed to a Machine Suprex, is a really cool extender, and it does help this deck a lot. I mention that because now you have another playthrough Nibiru, which was always a really big pain for this deck unless you establish Giant Ogre early. But the Fighting Spirit allowing you to pull out from the deck is really cool, but I don't like the fact that you now have to play the Dino Wrestler cards or the G Golem cards, which they don't necessarily have much synergy with Goki at all, being completely honest, especially the fact that they don't synergize at all. Literally, that's not a joke. They don't have any synergies. There's no generic monster of the Goki archetype that needs like straight effect monsters or needs like Cybers or dinosaurs. So this is like a really weird like iteration, because I do understand the point of Dragon Ogre, which is the synchro, which wouldn't be weird if there was an in-theme Goki tuner. There is not. It's so that you can pull the Dino Wrestler tuner monsters, I think, out of the deck and use them as the tuners for Dragon Ogre. Like I said, that's just my thing. I love this archetype. Like I said, I talk about it for a while. I might do some videos on it. But when I really look at it, it's one of the problems I find with Doom's Dimension for this deck is that I do understand what they're trying to do, but this was not a deck that needed this type of support. This deck definitely needed more like Goki Warrior specific support over what it received. So Sheik Ogre was cool. I think Tyrant Ogre and Dragon Ogre could have been cool if they were specifically able to be made in Goki, so they don't need like outside engine to help, or at least with Tyrant Ogre being more of a, like I said, warrior focused, because you can link climb in this deck. But I will get off of it here. There's not much more to talk about. This deck probably won't see too much play, but like I said, the support for just being a link climbing deck, Goki is no joke, so do be careful. One thing too I did want to mention is that a lot of decks lose to Droll. This is one of the decks that does lose to Droll very badly if they don't have the right setup. So that's another thing for Doom's Dimension. There's a lot of decks that are not Droll intolerant. They are very Droll tolerant. I mean, they're not Droll tolerant. They're very Droll intolerant. So Droll hurts them a lot. So do keep that in mind. Now we will cover Archmage and Doom Z really quickly. I do have a video for this, as you can tell. Point is, for these decks, I won't go too much in depth here. Doom Z is a cool strategy. I do hope that someone shakes the mold and makes this deck a little bit more usable before we receive Burst Protocol, because there might be some more support for this deck there. Point aside is, with Doom Z, I think this archetype is pretty cool. I do think that it's very like techie if you use the right engine, but I do think this deck is not complete by any means. It needs a lot more support, and definitely would benefit if we get another wave of support soon. That would make this deck stronger. So once they're released in TCG, we're not going to see this deck do much. I think if we wait a little bit longer, this deck might become more broken. So that's kind of where I leave it for you guys. Do think that, and the Archmage stuff also is a part of this art or this type of like story, or the whole thing of each different story. Point is, for the Doom Z and the Archmage cards, the synergy is good. Archmage gets a bit better. I don't think it breaks into the metagame, unfortunately. Archmage actually is a really cool deck. It's just that it takes way too much for its combos. I think if they had made Archmage only have like 1 to 2 card combos, mostly like really ones that aren't super card intensive for the amount, I think those decks could be a bit better. But for right now, I think Archmage as well as Doom Z are kind of in this position where they're good decks, but they're not going to be great. We're not really going to see the metagame. So unfortunately for the Doom's Dimension format, these are decks that are okay. You might see some people try to rogue play them, but they're not good. Now going into Magnificestorm, which I think is going to be called like Raging Typhoon or Rising something Typhoon. Point of the Magnificestorms, I think that they will immediately see play. Now, Magnificestorm is a deck that I will say, because you've already, obviously I had video for it too. This deck definitely will see play. I was wrong about the I think it's going to be called something else, but the Crothia. This one searches both MST and a card. This card will be a 3 of, because I think it's actually really that good. In my last video, I was thinking about it being kind of like, because how to get it out, and I realized there's an easier way to get it out. So if anyone has been mentioning that, clearly I understand. It is a lot better than I was giving credit for, but not really the point of it. I think this deck was always meant to be more of an engine deck, and more of a, you can add engines to this deck to make it better. Point aside here is that I think that this archetype is good. I don't think that it's going to be like a tier 1, tier 0-ish deck. It's still very strong, so it's like a tier 2 deck. So if anyone wants to shock anyone and play this deck very well and like really like mess up a metagame or a tournament or a regional or even a YCS, right, I would love to see it, because I think this is a deck that definitely is underappreciated right now. I think it's a very good like tech engine, and a lot of people should play it. But to be honest, that's where I'm going to leave like Raging Typhoon, I think it's going to be called, or specifically the Magnificent because I think it's still a good deck by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think that it's not going to live up to its like actual full potential unless there's more support, because I think this might be all the support this deck gets for a very long time, but I could always be wrong. Now let's talk about the last important cards of the set, because everything else is kind of the fact that we'll talk about the only real staple card here, and then the rest are going to be for Justice Hunters. Dominus Spiral, I think this is a very good Dominus card. It's basically just a compulsory evacuation device from hand. I think this is still a very good card. I think if you pair this up in something like, with Imperm or any of the Dominus cards, I mean, the problem is this is a specific Dominus card that is kind of making decks focus on their deck building. So there's realistically, there are 2 decks that come to mind that can use Dominus Spiral pretty well, and that's basically Fire King and going to be Mermail. The reason those 2 decks pop into my mind about how good these are is because they're either almost pure fire for the most part, or pure water completely outside of hand traps maybe. And, well, I mean, Mermail is pure water, by the way, it's just a pile deck. Point is, Dominus Spiral locks you from light or darks. So this is important because Dominus Spiral can't be in a lot of meta decks. It can only be in a few like rogue-ish or tier like 1.5 to 2-ish decks. And I think they're the ones that can take the best advantage of Spiral, because if you have a deck that can play either Dominus Purge and Spiral, they will do that. And if they can play Dominus Impulse and Spiral, they should do that, if you catch my drift. These are the decks that kind of do it. And then there's kind of the point, there's not really a good Earth deck or Wind deck outside of maybe Beneficent that could maybe use Dominus Spiral, because they could totally use Purge. It's one of these things where these cards will be played in, if we really have to play the best staples in a rogue deck to make it a lot better. I don't know how good that makes the deck in actuality. So I've mentioned this because Spiral is one of these cards where it's actually a very good Dominus card, but because it doesn't interact with light and dark, it makes it a lot less sought after for a lot of the strategies, because they're not as strong in that regard, because light and dark decks are usually primarily broken. Okay, now I've covered Dominus Spiral. Let's talk about it. K9, Draco Tail, Yummy. I think this is pretty obvious. These are the cards that will push these decks forward. I think much more less of the Draco Tail cards than, the ban list did. So what I mean by this is, because Droll, everybody said Droll might get hit. Some people thought Droll might get hit or banned. I didn't know if it would. I probably didn't focus on it either in my ban list video, because I never really saw them hitting Droll and Lockbird. My point is, Draco Tail can use Droll and Lockbird the best because it is intolerant to it. Oh, it's very tolerant to it because it doesn't have any weaknesses to Droll. Literally, if you Droll a Lucius or a Lucius as the only time I can think that could work, they might not even care because you're going to set everything else. So that's useless against Draco Tail, pretty much. Draco Tail also can take advantage of the Droll Lockbird because it is a it's a spellcaster, so it does have some synergy for certain fusions. So there is some ground there as to why Draco Tail will actually benefit more from the fact that they have access to that, because all the other decks kind of take some hit to it. K9 getting Noroi and getting access to Jax. I think Noroi is obviously the better of the two because it's a starter, and it does help out the only really good version of, or the most full power version of K9 Crystron of the K9 variant decks because of it being a machine. This is just a natural bridge now, because now having a machine monster means you have the ability to naturally link into something like Cyber Dragon, for instance, so Cyber Dragon Nova and Infinity. So this is actually a really good concept because now you're able to do that a bit easier, and it's really good to know that that's something you can do. Additionally, Jax is just a very good monster as maybe a one of if you want to run it. You don't have to in the variant decks, but if you're running pure, like I've talked about, Jax is your OTK enabler. Talking about Draco Tail very quickly. Frixol, I already mentioned in another video I've done, so go check that out. But Frixol and Sting are extremely good. I do think that Frixol is not the best card ever, but it is definitely important because now this deck has a lot more recyclability, and I think that was a very big weakness of the Draco Tail actual deck, is it did not have the ability to recycle as well as it could have. Now, it can do that, but it's more of making sure you have the ability to have a resource in hand and pull resources you already used from your graveyard or banished back. So, or I think it's graveyard specifically, pull them back out to the field and then put Frixel back in your hand, so you always have a fusion material from your hand. Very important. And then obviously Marshmallow is pretty much by itself. You could talk about Yum Yum Yummies, but it's like Marshmallow obviously redefines the power of Yummy, and I will have videos coming out about Yummy specifically, because I think this deck's reign of terror is about to truly begin, because Marshmallow fixes a few problems. It gives more names, because this deck only had access to so many names. It also has a recyclability built into its spells and traps, or spells specifically, but to put them back from the graveyard is just really too strong, I think, as a thing. It's very powerful, and it gives Marshmallow just the ability to cycle back cards that you have. But the point is, going into just linking straightforward and using the full combo of one card's absolutely insane, and is why Marshmallow and the Justice Hunters decks pull it off. But my final verdict here, I actually have my opinions here. So the first thing is Doomsday Dimension a bad set? Honestly, I'm going to say it's a bad set in terms of just ripping open a box. I think this is a problem that a lot of, I think Konami needs to fix this issue more so, not because of just ban lists. It is the fact that we keep on getting decks in terms of like the decks that are built into core products. A lot of them are getting support, which is great, but they're not having any meta relevance. And like I said, this is one of my biggest gripes I've always had. I don't like the fact that when we receive certain strategies, whether they're TCG exclusives or going to be decks that are brought up, like they're getting their new support, they feel like they were not designed with the DN, like like when they're actually testing them. They feel like they were not designed with the metagame that they were going to possibly be released in with that mindset. So what I mean is the fact that we can go back and talk about this. I look at the Goki support. I look at something like the Tri-Brigade support. Now, I think these cards are great for their decks, and they actually fix some issues that these decks have had for a while. They haven't had support in a long time, but they're not really the best matchups against certain strategies. Like, being completely honest, I played Goki for years. I don't see it in any way where, even with the new support, this deck can compete against something like Crystron K9 or even Vanquish Soul K9 in its nerfed form. I don't really see the advantage it puts up against something like Draco Tail, for instance, or against Yummy. Maybe the main deck monsters are big. I bring this up because decks like these that are getting support in these sets need to have some type of meta relevance, I think, with that in mind. So, like, it's not that they need to break the meta. Like, they have to be, like, direct counters to Justice Hunters, right? But they need to be direct, like, playability against these decks. Like, giving them some pieces of their own interaction. So, like, a great example is for something like, let's actually use something like Tri-Brigade, right? Tri-Brigade only got 2 cards in the set. I can only imagine this is probably because they might get support with the actual Chronicle deck. I think they should have received 1 more card. Now, 1 more card, you're thinking, well, what could it be? Well, my thing is, they needed 1 more card to probably be their own hand trap version of Mercurier, so that they would give the deck a little bit more flow. Now, the reason I say that is giving them a hand trap doesn't inherently make them broken, but if the hand trap actually has something like when your opponent activates a monster effect in their hand, right? So kind of keeping in theme with something like even the K9 cards. The point is, we actually have a card that kind of has that synergy going on from other design points, but also gives an old deck a new tool to use that can actually allow it to combat it. Like, it doesn't have to be a negate, but it would be really cool if, like, maybe you summon the Mercurier from your hand, and then you get to send from your deck like a Tri-Brigade card or something. Like, you send like a monster, so you can start your combos on, or get your combos set up on their turn. And then it makes sense that you can now do something like Hammer during the draw phase of your turn, because quick play, and go ahead and summon monsters by banishing materials that you set up during your turn. Because we are in that time where Yu-Gi-Oh has accelerated a lot. So I think that by giving decks that are receiving support to at least maybe not even match, but at least kind of meet the speed level of decks that are already going to be in the top echelon is just a lot better. Like I said, I could go onto this hill forever. I could die on this hill forever. Because I look at all of our different TCG exclusive decks, which are pretty much just pack filler, like Ashen and, Mitsurugi was like a very good representation of what we need. But like, think about the Ashens, the War Rocks, Gold Pride to an extent. Like, these decks that were TCG exclusives, but even strategies that were getting their support in other sets. And they're just not meeting the meta decks even halfway. They're not even meeting them like a quarter of the way. They're basically making a casual tier that no one plays. And I think that's annoying, because for sets like this, the growth should be there. I think that Konami's not losing any money by putting support that at least allows them to say, hey, if people only build some of the decks out of the actual physical boosters, like the actual stuff that they're trying to make us buy, and that's not the deck building packs. They say, hey, people are going to buy Doom's Dimension. Can they actually play with a strategy from this that's not a deck, outside of this? And the answer is going to be no. There is no way you could actually play with any of these strategies. Even like DDD, which I think is the most complete of the decks that you could play out of the Doom of Dimensions physical booster box itself, is still not comparable to like Yummy, Draco Tail, or K9. I think even the MST archetype might actually be the only one that's comparable. And the problem with this archetype is you can't even play it outside of the booster because you don't have Mystical Space Typhoon in the set, which is kind of hilarious, but you get my point. I'm just saying this set should have been great. I don't think it's a disaster completely. I think Konami philosophy of like how they've been designing decks is more of a problem. But honestly, that's where I think they need to fix it. If they fix that issue, I think that a lot of boosters going forward will be great. And I just think that if I had to give this thing a rating, I think this set's bad, but I think it's still good in terms of there's stuff you want out of here. So yeah, just where I'm going to leave it. I hope you guys did like this video. It's a bit of a different one where I talk about sets, and I'll probably be doing this for other ones. But yeah, let me know down below what you think. Go ahead and comment down below and tell me your favorite card out of Doom's Dimension if you have one. If you don't, tell me what your least favorite card is out of Doom's Dimension, because that's actually funny too. But as always, guys, I'm getting out of here. So this has been Brad from the Ed Army signing off, and for all of you out there, to sign on.